Welcome to Mavens of Data. This week we're speaking with Laura Madsen, author of AI and the Data Revolution: How Teams Can Harness Disruption to Conquer Turmoil. My favorite insight by Laura was about the hidden cost of tech debt and why most organizations avoid real transformation. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for joining, Laura. I'm really excited about our conversation today. We're going to go through a couple really relevant topics. Before we dive right in, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what really got you passionate about analytics?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everyone. So my background is okay. A long time ago, so it's really funny because in elementary school, and this is like a long time ago, right? I loved math, but my teachers told me I wasn't supposed to do math because I was a girl.
Yes.
Yeah. So I started shifting away from math, and then in college, ended up in psychology, which, if any of you have ever met me, is really strange because I am not maybe the most like keyed in from a psychological perspective, and there's not a lot you can do with a psychology degree that doesn't include therapy, which I almost failed my therapy practicum. So one day I was talking to my professor, and he said, there's this thing called applied psychology, which is essentially taking applied analytics and applying it to social science data. So think about it like analyzing survey data. It's probably the most obvious way to think about that. So that's what I did. I got a master's degree in applied psychology, and all we did is we learned statistical methods to control for error in applied or social science data. And that's how I kind of got started. And my first job out of college was a hospital that was trying to collect all of its data so we could do sort of a pre and a post in terms of what was happening with people's care, right? So what we had to figure out how to do is create a place where you could store all your data. And my career in data warehousing. So it was really just sort of, I fell into understanding that there was an aspect of psychology and data that went together. I was taught statistical algorithms to control for some error. And then I ended up sort of falling into, because I needed a lot of data, how to kind of warehouse that data, right? And I really just fell in love with it right from the beginning. I think of everything in like a giant matrix Excel sheet all the time. Doesn't matter what it is, I'll put it in an Excel sheet.
I love that. Actually, one of the best analysts that I've ever worked with, their degree was in psychology. And I think for a lot of people, they didn't realize when they entered psychology how much of, it was going to involve learning a little bit of R, learning statistical testing, and actually carrying these things out. And but yeah, no, I think I still to this day, I look back and I'm like, he was probably the best analyst I've ever worked with. Okay, so everyone's talking about AI. I know, I've heard you say before that a lot of companies are not ready for AI. Can you tell me a little bit about, why that is and where they might struggle?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, what's really important, what we're dealing with right now is a misunderstanding of AI. And it's happening kind of across the world. It's certainly happening in our industry from a data perspective. And the reason I say that is because AI can mean a lot of things. And we all use it like we know what we're talking about. And when I say AI, it may mean something very different to you. So because I have such a background in governance and data governance, semantics are important, and how we define things are important, and creating a shared understanding of what we mean and what success looks like is really important. So right from the jump, we're kind of, we're not aligned. When I look at organizations that want to, and I'm going to use air quotes here, do AI, I used a line in the book that said something like, it's not just like strapping on a pair of sneakers, right? And one of the challenges we have is we have spent so much time in most of our enterprises creating a data repository, right? I'm not going to call it a warehouse because they're not often warehouses anymore, at least not by design. And so when we've created a data warehouse or data repository, we have created it thinking about it strictly from an analytics or reporting perspective, right? We're going to bang some dashboards out because that's what people are asking for.
That's
What executives, yeah, what executives hear is, oh, we have a wealth of data that's all collected together, right? And we're going to get some data scientists in there, and then all of a sudden AI happens, and they're like, well, we're already doing all of the stuff that people are talking about in the context of AI, right? That's what the executives think. So they think it's a short walk. But the truth is that most data repositories are very focused on structured data, the stuff we get out from our source systems, right? So it's stuff that you can literally put into columns and rows. It's not unstructured and often not even semi-structured. Of course, there are exceptions. There are exceptions to everything. And that's what makes data, in many respects, extremely challenging, is there are just a billion nuances associated with this stuff. And it's hard to make that simplistic. But the reality is we have a little bit of a PR problem, like we don't know what AI really is. And then we have a little bit of reality problem, which is we actually, I use an analogy about airplanes, which I won't go into here because it'd be very confusing, but we're actually, what we built was a little small aircraft, and what the executives expect us to have is like a rocket ship. And so those lines are not, it's not an easy walk between those two things. So I think a lot of organizations are just kind of struggling with that. We've seen in the last 18 months a really big disruption in the data industry, with lots of layoffs of people that just aren't used to being in that situation, because data has been such a stable industry to be in for the last couple of decades. And a lot of it is because people can just think they can open up something like ChatGPT and ask all the questions and get the answers that are, close enough to correct. So we're seeing just a lot of that kind of disruption. And there are just a lot of organizations that are struggling with it for those reasons. But the reality is those organizations that think about these things as an asset's an overused word, foundation, like this is important to us as an organization, as a company, from the janitor to the CEO, and we invest in it and we understand what that investment means. Those are the organizations that are going to move forward.
I think everyone's confused about the definition of AI, because I'm confused about the definition of AI. Like if I look in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I can't quote it because this is like off the riff. It's not like I prepared this, but it's something along the lines of, using a computer to make a decision or do something that normally a human would have had to do. So then I spoke at my daughter's school and I brought in a computer vision model that they could all like bring their pencil up and it would, do object detection. And I gave a talk about AI. And at the end, somebody raised their hand and said, well, like based on that definition, does that make spell check AI? And I said, yes. Right. But then, of course, I left and I Googled it and I was like, I got to just double check that what I told this kid is correct. And apparently spell check was big AI research in the 50s. Right. Yeah. But we would not consider that AI now, just like we would not consider building a logistic regression model and making a decision off of that output. We would not now consider that AI. And so the definition seems to be changing, but it also seems like no one's really given like a formalized, standard, accepted definition. And I also think that, with the massive popularity of ChatGPT and large language models, the majority of the population sees generative AI as AI, when in reality, they've already been working with, making searches on YouTube, making searches on Google, and seeing things that would, you're giving data to a machine learning model that is more complex than a logistic regression model. And then it's ranking or doing something for you, but people have been using this forever and not thinking about it in that way. So that was like a very long rant to say, like, I'm still waiting myself to hear what exactly we want to call this. And also if it's going to be like trailing and updating every 6 months, like how do we define that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, right? Because the initial definition of AI, which happened of the, the summer of AI, Dartmouth. So they got a bunch of really smart people together in the 50s over a summer, and they thought they were going to solve artificial intelligence, and that's why it's called the summer of AI, coming out of Dartmouth. Of course, it didn't happen, but what did happen, of course, was it launched what we are still dealing with today, 60, 70 some years later. So yeah, it's tough because I was traveling late last year and I was standing in line somewhere, probably an airport, and I heard a woman's like, "Did you know that AI just landed our aircraft?" And I'm like, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, no!" Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just no, right? Autopilot has been operating long before what we consider to be AI was operating, and nobody wants that right now. And we don't want AI landing our aircraft. So we have a little bit of like a semantic problem. I don't define things. Like I didn't define data governance and disrupting data governance because I feel like it is one of those things where it ends up becoming like a race to the bottom because you're trying to simplify it so much you lose all kinds of nuances, and AI is extremely difficult to simplify. The one thing I did is sort of create a litmus test. So one thing, you need a crap ton of data, right? So a lot of companies are saying, well, we're doing AI, we're building AI. You're not. You're adopting LLMs, you're using your small data, and small language models are sort of becoming more and more of a thing. But those are existing because we've created algorithms based on billions of rows of data, unstructured, semi-structured, structured data over the last several decades. So you need an enormous amount of data, whether or not you're actually building it or you're using smaller data, and that algorithm was built from those, right? That's to be decided. And again, nuance. You need the cloud. You need cloud computing. So we are all kind of in the cloud now, but even 5 years ago that wasn't true. And then you need some pretty advanced statistical methodologies. So while we all sort of understand, linear regression and all those other things, the reality is that a tiny linear regression model is like a little bitty dot in the middle of a giant neural network. And that is one of the areas that I think makes most people uncomfortable starting to try to understand, conceptually what AI is, and to try to put it into real language so that we can become more clear about the objective of AI in our organizations. Because we can all get into a bunch of arguments about how you define AI and what's an LLM and what those neural networks are doing. We can do that for days. They've done it for decades. It doesn't matter. Where we're at right now is figuring out how we can make sure that AI is delivering for our enterprises and not outstrip ourselves in terms of capability, in terms of responsible or ethical AI, in terms of making sure that we're actually answering questions and not hallucinating, right? I mean, so that to me is really where we really have to put a finer point on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Daniel shared a definition of artificial intelligence. The problem is that some of the things that would fall under that, a lot of people, especially in the AI space, would not consider to be artificial intelligence. And so that's right, like the example I gave of spell check. Like people aren't going to consider spell check these days, even though the definition in the dictionary says that it is, even though at one point it was big artificial intelligence research, people aren't going to consider that AI right now.
Right.
But what you were talking about with the challenges that businesses are going to have trying to implement AI. And I saw this even in 2014, right, was when, that's when I started seeing them, but the data lake houses started becoming a big deal and people started pumping all this data into their data lake houses. And then what we ended up with was just a bunch of data. And we didn't use the majority of it. And then maybe a couple years later, I found myself actually going into the big data warehouse to like grab things and make them useful. But really what I was doing was putting them into like a relational format so that I could analyze them as I typically analyze data.
Yeah.
But so we're seeing a lot of data. Could you define data governance for us and sort of give us an idea about how How, like, are companies good at adopting this now? Do they care as much as they should? Like, where is sort of the state of data governance at this point?
Yeah. So it is really interesting. Yesterday on LinkedIn, as somebody read my book, Disrupting Data Governance, and made a comment like, okay, she wrote this in 2019 and we're still dealing with all these issues. And it's really interesting because we still kind of suck at data governance, guys. It's amazing to me that that's happening. It's frustrating to me that that's happening. I will say that we talk about it differently than we did when I wrote that book. I started doing the research in 2018. The book came out in 2019. But I think the reality is that we struggle with it because we don't really know from a business value perspective what data governance can provide to our enterprises. We think it's a checkbox activity to keep people safe or protected or reduce risk. And while it is that, I think the reality about data governance really comes down to we don't understand what it's really supposed to be doing for our enterprises, and really what it has to be about is business value. And yes, it is about protection and compliance and reducing risk, but a lot of our organizations feel like, and rightly so, that that's essentially the cost of doing business, right? That's the cost of entry. We should be doing those things, and so we get stuck on sort of making data governance all of those things, and it used to be the kitchen sink too, right? So the story of how I wrote Disrupting Data Governance was I left my corporate job in 2018. I started kind of, like after you leave an organization and all that work, you kind of look up and try to figure out, what's happening in the world. I did a bunch of research. I found out that data governance was still holding most of us back. And so I just Googled data governance and I looked for a definition. And at the time it was 2 full paragraphs, almost a full page. And I don't it's bananas to me because I don't care who you are. I don't know how you operationalize a page worth of stuff. And that's what it really comes down to, is if we can't figure out how to isolate what data governance is in a pretty succinct way and operationalize that so that it's delivering business value, I don't know what we're doing. What I came to is, I said earlier, I didn't divine data governance, and I didn't. But what I said is there are 4 things that you need to be doing. You need to increase usage. You have to, so it's usage, quality, lineage, and protection. You have to improve your data quality. You have to create and maintain data lineage, and you have to ensure protection. And when it comes down to data governance, you have to be doing all 4 in order to actually be considered to be doing data governance. And it doesn't mean that you have to be doing all 4 right away. You can focus on 1 or 2 for a period of time. But you have to be able to do all 4 in order for your organization to claim that you're doing it. And what happened essentially is that we introduced all these data literacy programs. People got really interested in it. People are being trained differently on data. We have a lot more people in our organizations that are much more savvy and smarter. There was a huge influx between that and literacy of people interested in data. And then we started asking really hard questions like, where does this data come from? How do we define it? How do we know what a high quality data set is? And it became a bellwether for sort of reimagining what data governance needs to be. Unfortunately, as we started to gain some traction on that, AI came like knocking on the door. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, gosh, now we need AI governance, right? So I think that most organizations still struggle a lot with data governance. And I think that in order to do really anything with data or AI right now in the world, you need to have solid foundations, and governance needs to be one of those.
Yeah, well, because otherwise you could spend time. I mean, I've seen it too, where I've done an analysis, somebody else on another team does an analysis, the numbers don't exactly foot. And then it's like, well, why? Well, because we were using different tables, but the information that was supposed to be in those tables was still the same metric. It should have been the same, right? So there's so many best standards. I think Another problem is that I know for myself, so I was the data steward for all of the subscription product tables for a company that I worked for. And it can feel like one of the jobs that it's not flashy, right? Like you build a model, the idea of ROI is much more crisp and straightforward, because if somebody uses data that is a problem and there's a problem, well, yes, we just saved the company some heartache, but saving is not the same as generating. So it almost seems thankless. I also see, so George Firakin is somebody that I suggest everyone follow. He's on LinkedIn and he talks almost exclusively about data governance. But I feel it's almost similar to, when I would speak about ML ops and experiment tracking and data lineage and these things that are so important and people should care. I feel like it just isn't sexy enough to get the traction that other areas get. And so from your perspective, do you think that this adoption of data governance is sometimes like an incentive problem because people don't understand, I'm over here, I'm keeping everything working the way it's supposed to, but it's maybe something that isn't as visible? Or do you think it's just like an education problem? Like, where do you think this problem is that people don't get as excited about data governance as maybe we'd hope they would?
Sure. Yeah. Well, for one thing, it has the word governance in it, right? Like, hard to get excited about something called governance. Second, I think that you made a comment about how it's really not as exciting as maybe some other aspects of data, and that's true. Like, and I've had this conversation with lots of people about data, like dashboards. Like in the early 2000s, an executive came to me. He's like, "Hey, we got to build a dashboard." I'm like, "Flash in the pan, not a big deal. Let's not do that. It's not the way we should be spending our time and money." I still believe that. But the reality is that's what most people expect out of your data team is a dashboard. Mm-hmm. To get to a dashboard is a million things. And to get to a dashboard that actually equates to reusability on the back end, which all data professionals should care about, is a totally different thing. So data governance is a lot like a seatbelt. You don't really know you need it until it's too late.
Yeah.
And the hard thing about psychology, how humans interact and operate and prioritize, is that we don't always prioritize those kinds of things, right? It's the fear-mongering aspect of it. So for a long time, I used to advocate that in order to get your organization to understand how important data governance is, you need to come at them with that sort of fear state. Like, well, if you don't do this, it's going to be millions of dollars of fines. And that's a short-term play, and it can work. It can be really effective. Especially when we actually see really big fines happening and quoting like, "Hey, lack of data governance did this," right? But the reality is you put some money into it, you don't see any results for a while because it's a seatbelt, and then all of a sudden you start pulling that money back because you don't see anything, right?
Yep.
And so I do think that it's a little bit of a PR problem. But you also don't want to be walking around like data governance, because nobody's going to listen to you after about the 50th time. I think the other thing that's really important in organizations is what I term data governance literacy. So we often will go into an organization and we'll be like, "You're the data owner and you're the data steward." And they're like, "No, please." But then we just tell them that they have these titles and all this responsibility, but we rarely give them an understanding of what that looks like and how that operates and what it looks like from a day-to-day perspective. Like, what are you doing on an average Tuesday if you're a data steward? And in particular, what are you doing on an average Tuesday if you're a voluntold data steward, which is you already have a full-time job? Mm-hmm. How you're being asked to do something that is actually really important to the organization because seatbelt, right? So I do think that we fail a little bit on the PR side of it. I think we fail a little bit on making sure people have the right tools, because if you look at change models, one of the most important thing in change models is making sure that people are well educated and have the tools to be able to provide support and to execute or create action in something. And we often don't do that in data governance.
Yeah. I think for me too, it was also difficult because I felt like come review time, it is like very difficult to make a seatbelt look right. Like it needs to be framed differently within the organization. There needs to be buy-in in a way that like the people who are doing this crucial work are recognized for the, safe data that they're providing.
Right.
And so is also part of being able to have a more effective data governance program. Is that like tied to tech debt in any way? And like, can you define tech debt and talk about how those might be related?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so yeah. I'm sure they are related, but I can't actually cross that line right now. But I'll talk about that a little bit, and then maybe I'll be able to get back to data. So the interesting thing is when I started doing research for the book AI and the Data Revolution, it was really around and I'm just tell you that I'm one of those people, right? I'm very much a pessimistic person. And I thought, well, if AI is going to take my job, I might as well understand it a little bit better. And I started talking to a lot of people that have a lot of experience in AI. And I'm talking about like decades and decades of academic research experience in AI, not somebody that, was recently calling themselves a data scientist and then decided to call themselves an artificial intelligence engineer, because that's been happening too. And as they were talking, I started to realize a couple of things. Number one, most organizations have spent most of their time getting structured data prepared, and AI does not operate without unstructured and semi-structured data. So we have a data type problem in most organizations. But the other thing that I think really has happened in a lot of organizations is what we all lovingly refer to as tech debt or data debt. And that is the lack of, happens for lots of reasons, but let's just pick on lack of strong methodologies, lack of strong leadership, lack of really good foundations to be able to execute reliably, has created a situation where we're spooling off deliverables as fast and dirty as we can. And I actually feel like dashboards fall into that often, right? And it is literally like, I need this tomorrow. And you're like, okay. And you don't have time, but you're constantly being bombarded by this, like, well, we're not going to give data budget because you're not giving us what we want. And we're cutting this and we're not doing that. And we're not going to do data governance, because they're always hounding you to turn stuff around as fast as possible. And all of a sudden you look back and you have 2, 3, 4 years of tech debt that is just dragging you down. So anything that you would want to like build net new is cut by half or more, because you're always maintaining the stuff that they had asked for that they needed in 24 hours. And you never had the time to build it right. And that is really the noose around our necks of being able to reimagine how we create data foundations to be able to take advantage of AI and AI capabilities. We can't do that when we have all of this sort of tech debt, data debt hanging around like Marley's chains, right? So I think it is one of the biggest areas that organizations need to focus on if they're serious about recasting their future towards AI. Or the other thing is just lop everything off and start over, which seems insane and really expensive. But I do think that is one of the areas that we struggle with so much, is that there's just so much pressure to go fast and to do more with so much less, that it is extremely difficult for us to get out of that sort of constant barrage of data debt and how to build it.
Right, and set things up thoughtfully. And I think it's going to, because MLOps tools have largely only been around since around 2018. So in that way, it's going to help with data lineage. It's going to help with organizing our experiments and helping us stay organized in certain ways. But I agree with the, with the quick turnaround and I've done an awful job sometimes of keeping my files organized. And then you ask me something 3 months later and it becomes this huge dig. And I remember, this was like 10 years ago now, but I wanted about a week for an analysis. And the guy literally told me, he's like, look, if you won't get this to me, I'm going to send it over to India and have them do it overnight. And I was like, okay, cool, do that. But let me know how it goes. But there's this constant pressure. So do you see certain industries actually more likely to adopt data governance, or like who's handling this disruption well?
Yeah, so I don't see a scenario where it's just industries. I see it as being very company or organization specific, and it has a lot to do with their leadership. And those people that are, understand that there's work that needs to be done that is not fun or interesting, but it is the work. But there's also things that you can provide that provide value so that you can sort of run cover for the work, if you will. I used to call it my you shiny thing. Like, yes, you can build a dashboard for them, but in the meantime, we're going to be doing all these other things, knowing that there is a long game here, right? You need to be able to think that way. So there are absolutely organizations, and we already know that in many respects because AI exists now because of those big tech companies. They were running the long game. They were investing in this. They were building data lakes out of unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data, videos and photos and comments on the internet for many, many years, decades, building those large language models, building those algorithms behind those things. None of us even knew what was happening. It was completely behind the scenes, right? Other than the people that are in those big tech companies and the articles that were coming out in those academic journals. So if you were in the know and you were reading those, you could see, that sort of happening along that journey. So, I think that it isn't specific to an industry. It is specific to how an organization values or does not value data and what it takes to get AI out the door. And in many respects, I think AI has caught on to people's imaginations because it feels like, oh, I just open up a window and I just type in a question, I get all my answers. Versus the alternate that we have provided in many organizations today, which is, okay, well, you go on to ServiceNow and you submit a request, and then somebody will get back to you and you'll prioritize it, and then it'll go through a committee, and then that committee will prioritize it, and then you'll be put in a queue, and that queue will be, it's like, I'm sorry, what? I'm trying to run a business here. I don't have time for committees and queues and ServiceNow tickets. And that is one of the challenges that we're dealing with right now in most enterprises.
Yeah. So I did see a question in here about data lineage across systems. And so I actually don't have I'm trying to think back into my experience, but I don't think I have any experience with tracking data lineage across systems. Where I've tracked data lineage is for like an individual machine learning project where there's going to be multiple iterations of the data, and it will be able to show me a flow chart of like the data I started with and all the changes that were made to it along the way, if pieces of it were deleted, different stuff. So I can track that. And then also at the end, when I get to my final model, because basically what I'm setting up is I'm saying, okay, I'm going to have a machine learning project. You go into it, it's going to have all my iterations of the model. It's going to be able to tell me in charts, I'll be able to look at the loss function. I'll be able to look at other metrics. I'll be able to say, okay, this is the model I like. Then I go into that model, I'm able to look at all the changes that happen to the data along the way. And then if I've decided that that's my best model, I'm going to add that to a model registry. The tool that I use for that is Comet. It has a really robust community edition, so you can use it for free without ever having to pay anything, and you'd be able to track your data lineage and your model runs, and you'd be able to compare all the metrics. I know for experiment tracking, a lot of people use ML Flow. I really like Comet because it's like no, very low code. You just give it the API key, a couple variables, and then it starts tracking your models pretty easily. So that's completely, you can do that for completely free. But again, yeah, I don't know anything about data lineage like on a wider scale.
Yeah.
And so also bringing it back, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about why you're really enthusiastic about graph data?
So, if you can weigh in on the lineage thing though, data catalogs. So
Yep.
if you're running an enterprise function, you can buy a data catalog, and those data catalogs will trace your lineage across multiple systems to a source. So back in the day, we used to call it source to target. It's fancier now, but data catalogs can be really advantageous. And it was actually, there's a million of them out there now, but they are incredibly beneficial tools to be able to manage all of that data that's coming out of your source and allow stewards actually to operate within that and managing the definitions, the source of that data, all the data quality standards, all those kinds of things. So that's your best bet, and there are several out there.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about graphs or knowledge graphs. So again, I like when I start a book to not have a lot of preconceived notions. And prior to the research for AI and the data revolution, I didn't have a lot of preconceived notions around graph databases or knowledge graphs specifically. I was sort of peripheral to several other organizations that were working on them. So my friends at Semantic Arts is a long-standing, decades-long actually, company that has focused almost exclusively on knowledge graphs and graph databases. And they help organizations make that transition. So I've known them for a long time. I've spoken at their conferences, and it's sort of like, that's really interesting. And then data.world, which is a data catalog that is based on knowledge graphs. And so those were kind of like, that's what I knew before I went into this research for AI and data revolution. Very quickly into that research, I recognized that we in the data industry had a problem. And that problem was we've been spending all of our time in our repositories on structured data, and AI needed actually unstructured and semi-structured data. And I started looking for solutions from a back-end perspective to solve that problem. In other words, how do enterprises store data that is unstructured and semi-structured? So we have two problems. We have a technology problem and we have a governance problem when it comes to unstructured and semi-structured data. There's only one game in town, apparently, through that research. And by the way, all these things are temporal truths, right? I think that the reality is lots of things are going to change. As AI becomes more broad, as it becomes deeper, as we have more and more data and the algorithms get more advanced, technology will advance and we'll find new ways to do this. But right now, the only way that you can really create a foundation to build your own, and I'm going to use air quotes again here, AI, because we haven't defined it for each other, is through graph databases or knowledge graphs, building that semantics, the ontologies, all of those kinds of things, the semantic layer, the ontologies. So I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in graph databases or knowledge graphs, but what I came to that conclusion pretty clearly in that research for the book was that is really the only game in town. And the good news is there are organizations that have been doing this for a really long time that can, sort of inform and help guide. There's somebody I follow on LinkedIn, Tony Seal, who is incredibly well informed about graph databases and knowledge graphs. And so I would highly recommend him, and it's SEALE, Tony Seal. And then of course my friends at Semantic Arts and data.world. And at data.world, they actually also have a podcast called Catalog and Cocktails, I believe, which is a great way to learn about what's happening in the data catalog space, governance, and also AI and knowledge graphs. So
Okay.
it's helpful information when it comes to those kinds of things.
Okay. So I assume, prefer graph to a vector database for structure. And I mean, I get that, right? Because you've got to create embeddings, which uses machine learning, which already is going to lose some information. But and I've always only used vector databases for when I'm building an LLM application.
Yep.
Is it more difficult to, I see the benefit, and I've used graph databases before, and I've led teams where we're having discussions about purchasing, graph database. And, typically what I do there is say, okay, let's, do like a graph analysis, because you can use tools to look at a graph and see the relationships are there without having to actually go whole hog and get the database and put your data in there, right? But for things like identifying, complex fraud relationships, or I think the very first time I used a graph tool was looking at diabetes patients and trying to understand, like, what are the relationships here that might not have been relational. Did I ask the question before I forgot what it was, or?
We started off asking sort of about the difference in my, like prefer graph over vector.
Yeah.
And then you went into sort of your experience with graph databases. And
oh, right. Yeah. No. Is it a lot more difficult to set up a graph database? Because with a vector database, it's almost just sort of like you're going to grab these resources together. You're going to chunk them up.
Yeah.
You're going to, you can get a little bit more sophisticated and a little better than that. But, it works when you just throw data at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Sure. So first and foremost, I think what's really important for all of us to recognize, no matter what you're doing, how you're doing it, what organization, what enterprise, if it works for you, it works and it's perfect. And we so often get distracted by a new shiny thing or solving for a problem we don't even have yet, which is my favorite problem, which also leads to tech debt often. So if it's working for you, work it. Right up until the point where it doesn't work for you, and then you have to ask yourself some tough questions. So I think that's really important for us to acknowledge. But yeah, that's a fair call out. I actually posted on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about how important it is to, like knowledge graphs are kind of the future in that. And I made a comment, something like, it's hard work. And then somebody commented back like, roughly, I'm paraphrasing, like, it's hard work, isn't it? Isn't it hard to do it the wrong way? Well, pick your hard, right? That's the thing. Like, it's all difficult. Pick which difficult you want. And so what I do believe that what is challenging is some of those, like the semantics or the context layer and the ontologies, when you've never really had a data governance foundation to rely on to be able to help build those things. And I do think that can be difficult for enterprises that have just sort of operated like data governance is a risk thing. Like, we'll just deal with it if we ever have to deal with it, not really thinking about it as a proactive building of a foundation to create aspects of reusability on all of the things that we're doing for data, right? Because we're building data and we're investing in that, we should be able to do that extremely well. So, and that's what data governance helps you do. So I would say, sure, it's difficult. But there is lots of layers of difficult in anything we partake in right now with data. And if your end game is really truly AI, the answer seems to be right now that's the only way forward. It doesn't mean it's literally the only way forward.
Right. I get you. All right, so it is time to head over to Q&A. So Philip or Felipe asked, based on your experience, what are the most impactful low-hanging fruits you've seen when trying to quickly improve data governance in a company? And as a follow-up, how do you see that changing with AI? Are there governance priorities that shift or accelerate because of it? That's a really good question.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, here's the thing with data governance is that low-hanging fruit is a very difficult thing. I work with a lot of companies and they'll ask me like, oh, well, we can't agree on the definition of a customer. Okay, well, here's your low-hanging fruit. Don't agree. It's completely fine. Because if you're in a large organization with a whole bunch of data and lots of different teams, we're all going to have different definitions of customer. What you have to worry about is the one definition of customer that you can all agree on when you're comparing things. If you're comparing something across a team, a department, a geographic region, a campus, whatever it is, you all have to agree. But if it's your day-to-day, Monday through Friday, let them use whatever the heck they want. Be clear about that if you're sharing it out. Hey, this is, finance's version of a customer. But we get so wrapped around the axle that we have to have one thing. We don't have to have one thing because there's no way that that's true anymore. Not in our modern worlds. It's too much work. So I think a lot of organizations kind of get stuck on that and they can't untangle themselves from like, we have to have one definition of a customer. Nope, you don't. So that's one nice piece of low-hanging fruit. Don't chase those. Chase what the enterprise wants it to be. And the nice thing is if you have an enterprise with some strong leadership, they can say, this is what it is. And, that is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important way to think about some of that, front end aspects of data governance, if you will. I will tell you also, like, please, whatever you do not start with technology. Do not start with technology. One of the challenges we have is because most organizations don't really understand the procedures or processes associated with data governance, like what you're supposed to be doing on an average Tuesday. They think that a data catalog will answer the problem typically. It doesn't answer the problem because you don't know what the question is. Technology can only help you if you know what the question is. So the problem is you go out, you think a data catalog is going to answer the question, but it really is just a checkbox activity to look like you're doing something for data governance. Mm-hmm. And then immediately somebody's asking you, what do I get for that money? And then you're in that ROI situation. So that's a problem. So please don't do that. That would be the other piece of advice I would give you. And in terms of what AI is doing, in terms of, shifting the importance of data governance, or shifting priorities, yes, absolutely. So data governance has all of a sudden had this a moment, and early in probably last year, maybe late last year, people started saying, well, data governance is AI governance. It's not. They are not the same things. But data governance is part of the story associated with getting to AI governance and AI governance frameworks. What has probably shifted a lot more now is when you're thinking about AI and how much is on the line for it, that ensuring protection part of data governance becomes extremely important, right? We have to be protecting ourselves and our enterprises and being good stewards of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I've been in that scenario where I think it took us a month to define a metric that I never would have believed wasn't straightforward. Like I am not going to mention it because I don't understand how the definition isn't a given. Right. But even if it was just that leadership said, hey, we're going to go with this. And if you do something else, you need to use that metric in a different way. Cool. Modify it and put a footnote and don't try and pretend that it's going to foot to the real definition. But like it was a month. I sat in multiple meetings over a month trying to define this metric that I didn't realize needed to be defined.
Yes, I totally get that. I was interviewing somebody for the book and they were talking about how it took them 18 months to define weight of a patient as a hospital. Yes. And so my simple question to her was, well, what did you use in the meantime? Because that's actually your definition.
Yeah.
Because you were using something, right? So, yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so how is data quality monitored and reported across departments?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the reality is, in order to do data quality well, and very specifically monitor and report data quality, you will need a tool. And some data catalogs have quality aspects like data quality sort of suites built into them. Some of them actually are focused on other things. So that is one area. If you are still looking at a data catalog, think about it like, well, maybe we can do our quality stuff in here as well. If not, you can get standalone data quality tools. The third option, and one I have used personally before, is using your dashboard tool to report back data quality standards to the enterprise if you need to. And so all that really means is that you're building a lot of those algorithms behind the scenes and then visually showing them on your dashboard. So if you know, at the end of the day, data quality is really about sort of measures of central tendency. Your mean, median, mode, your frequencies of how often things are showing up, those kinds of things. And if they fall outside of a standard that's been defined, then you know you have a problem. So I think that's probably the easiest way to do that. It's definitely through a tool, because believe me, you don't want to do this in Excel. I've seen organizations try. The other thing I will tell you is that Danette McGilvery has written an incredible book about the 10 steps to building data quality. I cannot recommend it enough. She's been doing this work for a really long time, and she boils these things down to those 10 steps. She just released a 2.0 version of that book a couple of years ago, and really it is an excellent book.
Sorry, I'm still writing down the name of the book. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that recommendation. Okay. What advice would you recommend for a beginner in the data science field for technical, soft skills, and tools to leverage?
Okay. Oh, this is a good question, because I've been getting this a lot lately. Here's my thing. Number one, in a modern world, do not worry about the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't. They're changing too fast. There's too many of them. And AI is going to come and eat their lunch anyway. So if you can explain succinctly to your organization the value of, fill in the blank, data, analytics, a specific statistical algorithm, the importance of data governance. If you can explain and share a story to sort of get people to understand and kind of go along with you, that is an incredibly valuable skill that you will always need in data and will never be taken over by AI, because you have to look people in the eye in order to do it well. So first and foremost, that's what I would encourage you to do. A lot of data people that came up through my generation, we didn't focus on that because the work wasn't there. It was just about getting, it was like, chiseling on a stone tablet back in the day, right? We didn't have tools. We had to do it the really, really hard way. And by the time we got something, people were amazed that we got anything at all because it was really, really hard. That's not the situation you're in anymore. So get really great at explaining what that is. Worry about the tools later, because I think you can probably go out to ChatGPT and ask it to write you some code anyway and still look like a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do.
No, completely agree. And I think to reiterate too, the maybe last 7 years, my resume has focused a lot more on my ability to explain technical results to non-technical stakeholders. And I think that's exactly what you were getting at, is like having that skill of being able to tell a story with data, and not just that, but being able to communicate to somebody who is potentially going to hire you that you are actually capable of doing that skill. And again, not about the tools, but I think that like you should learn some SQL syntax, and then that's where it becomes tool agnostic, right? Because I don't care if it's Postgres, I don't care if it's Microsoft SQL Server, I don't care, because you're just going to be changing like to limit, whatever, like you're only going to be changing a couple lines, and like SQL is pretty standard across the different tools that are available. However, I would say like, you do probably still want to learn some Python, just because that's what people are looking for. That's what's going to be on the job recs that like you're applying to, that one still. But like Laura said, we don't know if in a couple years it's a completely different language that we're all expected to learn and go use. And I've, had to change the tools and the languages that I've used more than once throughout my career. What is the best way to get started in data governance? How do you develop that skill set?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Here it is. This is the secret sauce. and everybody's surprised when I say this. Enthusiasm. That is it. That is literally it. Because the reality is I can teach you about data. I can teach you about all the things that come along for the ride, but I cannot teach you excitement and interest and passion and enthusiasm about the topic of data governance. I can't teach that. Either you have it or you don't. And if you don't, that job will burn you out so fast you can't even imagine, because it is probably one of the most difficult jobs in a data team today, is data governance, without question. So if you have enthusiasm for it, the rest kind of happens. So you read, you find stuff out. What's incredibly valuable in data governance are those soft skills, because you're not doing a data job. It is not about, where the data bodies are buried. It's not, all the things that happen in databases and understanding how you can apply a statistic. That's somebody else's job now. Your job is to make sure that you create some kind of ambassadorship for your data, and understanding that creating those data foundations help your organization get better about data. That's data governance's job. So to me, that is number one. I hire for enthusiasm almost exclusively, and I'll teach other things.
Yep, I could imagine a world where it's all about going on tour, talking to different organizations within the business, getting buy-in that it's actually important. Because once you go to start implementing these things, it's not the most technically difficult thing that you're going to do. But you need to get people on board, and you need to get people to care. One more, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face related to data governance?
People. It's the people. It's the people that dig in their heels, that refuse to participate. It's the people that keep, hammering on you to do faster with more, or less, I should say. Faster with less, not faster with more. That would be easier. It's the people. It is by far the hardest, which is why enthusiasm is what I look for when I'm talking about, looking to hire somebody. The reality is that the technology part of this job has always been a little bit easier. As Kristen just said, it's really, once you get to the point where you're done answering all the questions, executing it into your data repositories, making sure that you have the right things in the right places, that's the easy part, right? So it is really leading those people, making sure that they understand what the job is, that they're doing that job consistently. And then once you get that rolling, then you have your data quality for lineage, or your data catalog for lineage. You're looking at your data quality and reporting that back, and you're ensuring that your data is appropriately protected through your relationship with your compliance department and your cybersecurity department. Those are things that all fall together once you get the people associated with all those things aligned.
Love that. I feel like most of business is exactly that, getting people to let you do what you think is best for them. Let you take care of them. Let me take care of you. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like the way you come across is so refreshing, and I learned a lot myself, and I had a great time in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the time.